Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody to the next battle of Battle Chads. Joined back now with Josh, the one, the only, the best Battle Chad around. Say hi, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Nice to have you back. Sorry that we missed you
Cheers,
on
man.
the last little bonus episode.
Yeah, it's one of those things, mate. Family's got a family, you need to prioritize some stuff. It's a good thing with the team. We've got a really good support network, and everyone has got that true team ethos of looking out for each other. And when one of us needed some expertise, we're never too far from it.
Absolutely. And tonight we're here on our cozy wear, having our sweaters and everything ready to go to talk about Standard, the top 5 decks of Standard, in fact.
Music to my ears, Luis. Music to my ears.
I know you've been digging it lately, having a good time playing some Standard. Me too. Our local game store has been popping off with tons of people for Standard, which is something I did not think would ever happen again. So I'm really excited that it's finally here.
I think Foundations has been a really good set to introduce to the Standard format, because it's not been one of those sets where we used to, where it's been overpowered. It's not ruining Eternal Magic. It's not ruining Modern, etc. It's not having the massive impacts, but it's having just enough spice to keep Modern. And I'm not sure about Pioneer. I'm not sure how relevant Pioneer is now, to be fair. But it's keeping Standard, pretty interesting. I know the aggro decks have got a few buffs in that, but yeah, we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Exactly. I'm very happy to see Foundations. People are calling it the best set to ever happen for Standard, the best thing to ever happen for Standard. And I think I'm inclined to agree. And yeah, I'm unsure about Pioneer. Hopefully it'll stick around and it'll be good. We'll see. Wizards tends to surprise with all kinds of things, so we don't know. But all in all, I'm very happy with Foundations. I think it's a big win for Wizards, which is can't say that happens too often these days. And I'm very excited to introduce to you guys this Standard podcast, talking about the best 5 decks in Standard, or at least what we think is the best 5. If you want to win a regional championship qualifier, this is what I think you should be playing to get there.
We've also included a few spicy honorable mentions, some that we've been looking at and thinking these could actually be really good meta calls, or really good, interesting decks that could come and still be very, very competitive.
Absolutely. And to start off, we want to go through to Dimir mid-range, probably the most represented and most played style of deck right now. It is very tempo heavy. It's my deck of choice, is what I play. And as everyone in my local game store will know, is a deck that I love to the very bottom of my heart, and how it performs. We're obviously going to be looking at just a generic list that we see on MTG Goldfish and those kind of places. Doesn't mean this is the exact list you have to play. I know my list is quite different from what you see on screen right now, at least in certain ways. But so just so we have an idea of what's going on.
There seems to be in these archetypes we're going to talk about, there seems to be a lot of interpretation to how players want to play, because for example, let's talk about Dimir midrange, because we're on at Dimir midrange, for example, or Dimir tempo. There seems to be lists that sort of hedge towards one way, hedge towards another, but you look at the creature packages and there's all different representations or different numbers in how people are building the decks. But then there's also slightly more aggro slanted versions, slightly more control side versions. There seems to be lots of interpretations of these archetypes, so you can never really, like you can in Modern, for example, you can sit down if you're against Boros Energy or whatever, you could sort of probably reiterate from heart the deck 75, but minus the 3 or 4 changes, where you could sit down and play against Dimir tempo or mid-range, whatever you want to call it, and you could be having cards that A, you might not have seen in lists before, or B, completely different interpretations of those lists.
Absolutely. For example, in this one, right, you can see that this style of deck here is a little more slanted towards the mid-range side, with Shieldreds in the main board, with more Enduring Curiosities, with the full set of 4 Preachers and the full set of 8 removal spells for the 2-mana slot, and all 4 cutdowns in the main board. So it's definitely a lot more mid-rangey and more removal heavy, that kind of style, playing 0 counterspells in the main board from what I can see. Which is not the style of game I usually play. The style that I like to go towards usually has the Deep Cavern Bats, the Fairy Masterminds, but I have the full 4 Spyglass Iron. I like either a 3 or 4 Kaito. I like less removal spells, no shieldage in the main, and I don't play Preacher. I know a lot of people do, but I like the Flood Pit Drowner, the 2/1 flash creature that taps something and puts a stun counter on it, and some number of Mockingbird as well. And my own personal spice, Feybloom Trick, which I think is a fantastic card. It's an instant for 3 mana that taps a creature and makes 2/1/1 fairy flying creature tokens, which is just a very tempo-heavy style of play.
So, Luis, how would you say this deck gameplay changes and how it's built? Because obviously yours is fairly low to the ground in terms of threats. This one that we're looking at here tends to, even though there's no counter spells on it, tends to control the board in the early turns, then to make way for a Shieldred or a Preacher or something on turn 3, turn 4. So when you look at blue black as an archetype, how does it primarily want to play?
So it is all about the tempo in all versions of this deck. Obviously, this one leans a little more into the mid-range package, so it has a little more sustainability in that way. But generally speaking, it's about being able to make your opponent play on your speed. So if they're playing to your level of play, to what you're doing, it's really bad for them because they can't quite keep up with you in having those flash threats, having that amount of removal, having that efficient level of play. This version of the deck is more well-suited against the Golgari decks, playing the full 4 Anoints. That way that Dread Knight, that Mosswood Dread Knight isn't such a problem, because that card can definitely cause a bit of a headache if you're not ready for it. And because it has Shieldred, it also plays better against the Azorius kind of Oculus-style decks, which can grind you out, be very, very heavy onto the field, block your flyers, but with Shieldred around, you don't have to care so much, and you can force them to, hey, if you just keep drawing cards and playing these Oculuses, my Shieldred's going to take over the game, which is much better at doing this, because that deck does give the other style, the tempo style of Dimir aggro, a bit of trouble in how it plays.
Shieldred also gives the deck reach, because in these colors you don't really have reach in terms of straight to face damage, but Shieldred can be take that space of you whittle them down with your fairy masterminds, your deep cavern bats, all that good stuff, to a sort of a life total where they can stabilize, and then Shieldred just then is just a go for the face clock in that way.
Absolutely. And I think the most underrated card in this entire deck by far is Kaito. This card continues to impress me. I think it is just it does everything you want a Planeswalker to do. It does everything that you want a card to do. It is both a threat and a game ender, while being a card draw engine that keeps you just always with gas, which is fantastic for what this style of deck wants, especially when you get to use things like the Flood Pit Drowner that I mentioned, because having that ETB, tapping something down, and then Kaitoing it away, just to do it again later on, is a huge level of card advantage that a lot of people kind of don't realize how much you gain from it, which is why I think Kaito deserves more slots in this kind of deck. It's really my favorite card, and what I think people need to be utilizing a bit more. My version obviously uses the more pioneer style ninjas, that kind of style of deck. And I think that's the better way to build the deck, but this style of deck definitely does better into a Golgari heavy meta.
It's the Kaito is a really awkward threat for a lot of people to deal with, because when it is a creature, it is hexproof. And then when it's not a creature, it's a planeswalker. So you need a very specific set of removal to actually remove the Kaito, or you need to have some sort of block, which obviously if it ninjas in, it's after blocks anyway. So yeah, it's a really awkward threat to deal with, and it is a legitimate threat. It comes in as a 3/4 creature, dealing 3 damage. Then you can just instantly then surveil 2, which can be quite relevant in certain decks to surveil, and then obviously draw a card.
For sure,
it's a very light shooter in that effect, And
I might get a little flack for this, but I think the best card to compare it to is something like Jace the Mind Sculptor. It has a uptick that is a little relevant, does a little bit of stuff, and helps you get closer to ending the game. It has a 0, which gives you some card advantage and card filtering. Not as good as Brainstorm, but still pretty decent. Surveilling 2, filtering those crappy cards from the top of your deck, and then drawing the most relevant card that you want out of the pile there. and then the -2, which allows you to tap a creature and put 2 stun counters on it. You ever seen that on an Archfiend of the Dross? It's the best and most fantastic way to make your opponent lose the game.
It's decent in this sort of style of deck with the speed that this deck can go to. It's almost as good as removal, like hard removal.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And that's this is probably what I think the premier deck of the format right now. It's the deck to beat. Fantastic deck, and I hope that a lot of people enjoy and pick up this style of play. On to the next deck we have on our little list here is the Golgari mid-range Golgari Demons style of deck. Another black-based deck that has the same removal package, all that kind of stuff on there. However, this is definitely more on the heavy removal side with strong, beefy plays instead of a bunch of little small flyers.
So this deck is a deck that I'm choosing to build. And the reason I've chosen to build this deck is because of one card that's come back into standard. And this card was actually really good in the standard that I played when it was in. And that's Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves is an excellent mana accelerant. And the thing with standard at the moment, the 3-drops are very good. There's like some of the best 3-drops I've known in a standard format. This deck plays Glister Sunslayer for 1. So if you can potentially get a turn 2 Glister Sunslayer. Now Glister has tons of text. The more you look at it, the more it read. It has First Strike, Death Touch. It's a really awkward to block it. It's a 3/3, and whenever Glister Sunslayer deals damage to a player, you can either choose to draw a card and lose a life, destroy target enchantment. Destroying target enchantments, with the Dimir decks in the previous standard, they were an issue. Can be, Leyline Binding is still in the format, and then remove up to 3 counters from a target permanent, which is, against Archfiend of the Dross can be actually game winning. So Glister is getting a turn 2 Glister out is potentially snowball and game ending. It avoids cut down and all that good stuff. And then it can also turbo you out into things like Sentinel, the Nameless City. Get a turn earlier on Archfiend of the Dross, and even some decks play main board Tranquil Throwback as well. So there's a real incentive to play Llanowar Elves, and also you can, because it's a Demons deck, the Unholy Annex part of Unholy Alex, the room is a 3 mana 2, so you can get a turn 2 room out with Llanowar Elves, and I really think that the accelerant in this deck is particularly special because of Llanowar Elves.
Absolutely. Something like Llanowar Elves, putting those big, beefy, strong 3-drops out is amazing. And you can even sometimes have that dream of like Liliana of the Veil that some people play in the main board. Yeah, it's a little hard because it's double black, but it can happen. And then you can think that you're back in the days of Innistrad, having that nice, quick Liliana come through, feeling really good that maybe Deathrite Shaman kind of imitation of Llanowar Elves there. And it's a really good way to make these mid-range decks function a bit better, because a lot of the time you're playing that 1-for-1 game, which can be a little bit awkward. But when you can accelerate things like Gliss out, draw that card, or accelerate things like Unholy Annex, which gives you extra cards as well, it makes these mid-range piles work a lot better, especially when your own Glissa can destroy the opponent's Unholy Annex.
You have, like I said, you'll continue looking through these lists if you do your research on standard, and you'll see, that the archetypes remain, and the archetype seems to be all there. But when you actually look at the way people build the decks, I mean, I'm looking at a green black pile here that doesn't actually have the demon package in it. So you see similar builds, you see similar cards being played. Like you'll see the 4 Llanowar Elves, you'll see the 3 Glister Sunslayers and all that good stuff. But you'll see different interpretations of the deck, which I really like. But you'll see spicy cards that are brought back into standard now that are seeing real good play and a real good space in sideboards. For example, Vivian Reed, Nissa, Ascendant Animist, all those good stuff. Maelstrom Pulse. They're all cards that are like just amazing includes in whether you're 75, even potentially even your 60, if you can sort of anticipate the meta you're going to go play into.
Oh, I know I missed Vivian Reed. She was in the standard that I originally started playing when I began the game. It was one of my favorite cards. Getting up to that ultimate, making everything
M19 was it?
I think so. Yeah, it was M19. She came out. And I used her in my Naya Dinosaurs Stompy deck using Llanowar Elves to get out a Steel Leaf champion back in the day. The good old days.
I mean, it's a great old planeswalker, and I think the Mosswood Dread Knights are a really awkward threat to deal with. It's just presenting your opponent with awkward threats to deal with and awkward problems, and they need to have very specific questions for. Sort of how the Dimir mid-range deck is with Kaito. It's all about playing these weird sticky threats that are really skill intensive in how you approach them, and it really challenges the planes, the deck builder and the pilot, how they want to construct their deck. And honestly, like, I think it's going to be one of those sort of metas where or those formats where the more you play, the more you understand the language of the format, and then you then go away building the archetype you've chosen to play. But Golgari mid range is a good archetype. I'm hedging towards. I just really like the look of it, and it hedges off blue. And it's because I feel like I'm stuck on blue black a lot. I'm stuck on, it seems to be like a one trick pony. So having access to no blue, and this also plays a bit like the secondary game plan to Greasefang, which is what I like in Pioneers.
Of course, because it what's really underrated, and I think that people don't appreciate enough in these style of decks, is that it's really good against the card cut down. Because if you look at the deck, you're like, oh yeah, I want my cut downs because there's 4 Llanowar Elves.
Yeah.
And 4 Mosswood Knights. Do you really want to cut that down? It doesn't feel good. And what else are you going to hit? There's no other target aside from Scavenging Ooze. And what are they going to do when you do that? They're just going to grow it in response.
Yeah.
So cut down becomes really bad.
Which you can do in turn 3 if you have the Llanowar Elf out.
Exactly. So it's one of those decks that is very strong against removal because they need to have it because of cards like Dross or Shieldred or anything like that. But it's not great at answering some of the other pieces like the Mosswood Dread Knights, who is a insane value engine that can just keep you going and keep a nice aggressive curve because it is a 3/2. It's nothing to laugh at. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the old Blood Tithe Harvester of old.
Yeah, exactly.
And then on from Golgari mid-range, we have...
Can we just talk about, before we move on to the Golgari, from Golgari engine, can we just talk about a little trick with Unholy Annex and the Soulstone Sanctuary?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Soulstone Sanctuary is a land that is sometimes played in the mana basis of this. Sometimes you'll see 1, sometimes you'll see 2, sometimes you'll see none. I think I'm going to hedge towards 1. And basically, for a 4 mana, you can permanently turn it into a 3/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types. So it's basically the combo that's used in Pioneer with Mutavault and Unholy Annex. You can use it with the land here, Soulstone Sanctuary. It costs twice as much, but it stays as a 3/3 land.
Super Mutavault.
Mm-hmm. Super Mutavault, yeah. And then it'll trigger your Unholy Annex potentially on curve.
Yeah, and it's unlike most of the other creature lands that you don't really want to activate it with its own mana usage. This one you're absolutely fine because it's staying as that land, right? Mm-hmm. It stays as that creature. It's not until end of turn. It's forever. So sometimes you'll have that 4 mana end of turn, and this will be one of the 4 mana. You're more than happy to utilize it in that way, as long as you know it's clear of removal.
Sweet, happy with that.
Then we have the combination decks, I'm going to call them here, because it's a mix between Gruul Prowess and Mono Red Prowess. I think they're very close to each other. They play slightly differently. One's more burn focused, one's more protection focused. But we'll talk about them both in this situation. We'll start with Gruul Prowess. This is taking like our third slot of the all 5 decks. None of them are in any particular order. It's just that this is a combination because it's the red kind of go fast, hit hard decks.
The main difference between them both, though, is essentially, there is sort of some protection could be played, but it's genuinely down to the card if you're going to play Question Druid or not. If you want to play Question Druid, then you're splashing for a couple of sideboard options. In this instance, it's going to be Paw Patch Formation. It's a really good card. It's got that utility of it does 3 really okay things. Nothing turbo special, but in very niche circumstances, it could be amazing. So you can choose one for 1 and a green. It's an instant. Choose one, destroy target creature with flying, destroy target enchantment, or draw a card and create a food token. Either way, it's going to trigger your prowess stuff or your triggers off, your cast triggers, etc. But yeah, it tends to be whether you're going to play Question Druid or not, and Question Druid is still a bit of a house.
Absolutely. It's a card that I think people were not ready for. It is such a house with the amount of card advantage it presents, because everyone's like, oh, it's kind of like an impulse, but it seems a little worse because of the way it exiles and when it goes away. But it's a 2-for-1 card. It has instant speed. It's so much better than a lot of the other impulse effects because of that instant speed. And then having that creature just be around randomly can just win you the game. It grows very, very quickly. Because if you see here, every single card aside from Pop Edge Formation will grow your Questing Druid because they're all red. And that's all that Questing Druid needs. It needs the card not to be only green.
Can we say the new additions to this sort of deck? Because the mono red aggro shells and standard have been around quite a bit, but they've had two big upgrades, and one's in the form of Screaming Nemesis, and the other is in the form of Bolt Wave. Now, Bolt Wave is an excellent sort of card in this sort of strategy because it's just simple, does 3 damage to each opponent, so it's not even targeted, so it gets around sort of hexproof if there is any of that stuff in the format. I'm not sure there is. I'm not seeing any, but it gets away the targeted effect, so you just cast it, and then obviously it triggers all your other stuff, deals 3 damage, and then the Screaming Nemesis ensures that your opponent can't gain life.
Absolutely. Screaming Nemesis being the 3/3 haste creature that whenever Screaming Nemesis is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. If a player is dealt damage in this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. A big thing with this is you can actually shock your own Screaming Nemesis to then get the extra bonus effect of its triggered ability, which is usually a better way to use this card, at least for the first time, just so you can make sure that your opponent is incapable of gaining life. Or it sometimes even turns something like your Witchstalker Frenzy, which is a card that reads deal 5 damage to target creature into a deal 5 damage to target player spell. Because you just target your Screaming Nemesis, it goes to the bin, but that doesn't matter because now you're sending 5 damage straight into your opponent's face.
I could see why the mono red decks could quite easily shift away from Questing Druid as a card advantage engine, because they do have Emberheart Challenger, which is a 1 red 2/2 with haste and prowess. So obviously it's a really aggressive card as it is. But whenever it gets targeted by a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you can exile top card of your library, and then until next turn you can play that card. So that's sort of a card advantage engine without having to splash a second color, which means that you can play cards such as Rockface Village in the mana base, as well as just having just basics. So you don't have to then splash into, Compulsion Forest, which might be the hedge in the mirror, or some people play, or some red decks play things like Restless Ridgeline and stuff, which are entering tap, which might actually, if you as an aggressive deck, a tap lands can be quite detrimental.
Exactly. And I know some of you may be wondering why we're showing you the Gruul Burn style of deck first, as the prowess is definitely more prevalent. And the main reason is because the mono red version plays a lot more like this. I'll also show you here the Gruul Prowess style, which is the other style of deck, and another reason to play green, which is not only the Questing Druid, but also the protection spells like Snakeskin Veil, or even Innkeeper's Talent, which just lets you grow your creatures a bit bigger. You may have seen this deck a little more often if you were watching the Worlds for 2024. This is the deck that Jean-Emmanuel Depras and many like him were playing. It has, again, that big, strong creature package. Has a lot of the mice, that are very, very strong in standard. And it uses Snakeskin Veil and other protecting spells to make sure that they can keep getting their damage through, and it can't be stopped by any old removal spell.
Because as we previously saw in the previous decks, the tempo and the mid range decks, cut down is everywhere, go for the throat is everywhere. So your primary removal spells, So there's a lot of removal going around, and these tend to be not necessarily glass cannon decks, but if you have a lot of removal spells and you can stick a threat, that's when the sort of red decks sort of lose momentum, and they're sort of cards like Monstrous Rage, etc., don't stack up very well.
Exactly. They're hedging their bets a little bit more with the Snakeskin Veil, making sure that they don't get blown out by a single removal spell ending the game, which can honestly happen very often for these style of decks. And here's the mono red version as well, just so you have it. As you can see, it plays the usual mice package, a few more creatures than usual, and just straight up burn and damage to the face. It just goes hard, goes strong. It doesn't care about protection. It doesn't care about having extra cards. This is a deck very much that's looking to beat you with its opening hand, and that's the style of of play it has. So if you're more all in and you just think you're very good with your mulligan decisions and how you play the deck in that way, this might be the best deck for you.
There is a third option. You can splash white because Boros Charm and Lightning Helix were printed into standard from Foundation. It's not from Lightning Helix was from
MKM, I think it was.
Yeah, that's right. But Boros Charm came in Foundation, so that's a massive upgrade for the Boros sort of aggro enthusiasts. But they tend not to be doing as well as the straight up red version or even the red green version.
But it definitely could be, as there's a lot still to be explored with Foundations. I don't think people have found the best iterations and best versions of each deck, as Foundations is still quite fresh and quite new. There's still a lot more to explore and a lot more to come from the deck building experts that are out there.
I don't think there is. Like, I think there's been enough time, me personally, but I just don't think there ever will be a proper, from the way I've looked at the archetype shift and the way people are built, like a proper 75 where you don't stray away from that. The whole deck seems to be sort of flex slots in a weird way. You see very, very few cards that are actually beyond like the land package and the removal package that tend to be, stuck and solved, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to say, right? Because it's fighting with two other very strong iterations of the deck, and you'd be a little hard pressed to think that the Boros Burn is just the better version. It probably is the better version in the mirror matches because of Lightning Helix, but it does have that bigger struggle against the other style of decks because there's more clunky 2-color 2-mana cards. And that can definitely matter when you're fighting things like Golgari midrange or Dimir midrange / tempo. Then from there we have another nice little kind of newer deck, I guess you can say. It's been around for a little while now, but it's been doing quite well, and I'm very excited to see it. Is the mono white tokens / mono white control deck.
Yeah, this deck was sort of taken into overdrive when Beza the Bounding Spring was printed, and then also it got backed up by Enduring Innocence out of Bloomborough. These cards are not only real good card advantage in white, which white doesn't get to see much, but the lifelink elements of it and the life gain elements of this deck, along with creating lots of tokens to clog up the board, means that in a really aggressive meta, this is a great deck choice to bring in.
Yeah, it's a very good deck. A lot of good cards from Bloomborough and Duskmourn. Not a lot has been gained yet from Foundations, mostly sideboard cards last I checked. Things like Authority of the Councils. Yeah, Fountain Port, fantastic card from Bloomborough. It's just like things like Authority of the Councils have been the biggest gain from Foundations. We've yet to see any huge shifts from the Foundation cards. There is some. There's probably more that are headed our way with it. But as you can see, a lot of the cards that are here right now are from the last 2 sets instead of the most recent set. But the deck has been performing really well, doing really well in challenges and tournaments all around. I think it has roughly a 6 to 7% meta share as well, so it is decently popular. And it's a deck that probably is for quite a few of the control players right now, because I know control is in a bit of a rough spot with the prevalence of Dimir Tempo, who tends to prey on the more control-y style archetypes. The white deck does a decent job at fighting against it with the amount of exile effects it has, a decent amount of wraths, and just that kind of decent card advantage engine that can get you off the ground.
So this deck will either win by attacking you with lots of tokens, or it will attack you with one massive Phyrexian artifact creature who's in some fall. So a game strategy could be, you clog the board with lots of creatures, Caretaker's Talent, Carrot Cake, etc. All those sort of cards, Beza, or however you want to say it, Virtual Loyalty, Fountain Port, even make lots of token creatures, and then you can Sunfold a lot of them, then untap, transform a massive Golgari, a Phyrexian artifact, and then attack for big damage.
Yeah, as our aficionado Lithuanian says, Beza is so good. Shout out to Lucas for that one.
Shout out Lucas. We need to have Lucas on the podcast one day. That'll be an interesting pod.
For sure.
We're gonna have to edit so much out of it. We have to get those bleeps, like beep beep. Every time someone swears, so I have to figure out how to do that.
Oh god.
But yeah, mono white control is one of those decks. I know Christian piloted this deck, and he found it a bit clunky. Didn't really like it. However, the numbers don't lie. and they've been putting up well. You see quite a few 5-0s. We saw a challenge win the other week or a couple of days ago, and then you see it doing fairly consistent across the board.
And aside from like Beza and maybe one or two other little cards, I know caretakers can get a little bit up there. It's a relatively cheap deck, as you can see. This entire deck from nothing, if you own 0 of the cards, it's saying about $270-ish. A lot of these cards you might just have laying around. A lot of these you could probably trade for quite easily. And to be fair, quite a few of them are playable in other formats. Things like Get Lost, I think, they can get a bit more stay, especially for formats like Pioneer. It'll also always be good there. And then you never know what might pop up in Modern or other, older formats, because there's just so much power in the standard sets of today.
I think looking at the entire meta as a whole, I've not seen standard being this cheap for a while. And if you take Shieldred the Apocalypse out the mix, like you look at the Dimir mid-range decks, they're playing 2 Shieldreds. That's probably best part of $140 on MTG. In fact, let's have a look. So 2 Shieldreds is valued here at $151. So if you actually look at the Dimir mid-range decks and the Golgari mid-range decks, etc., if you take away Shieldred the Apocalypse as the one card that you don't actually need to play at the moment, to be fair, in these iterations, because I know you don't play any main board, the card isn't necessarily required to build. You could build Golgari mid-range, because I've been looking researching the deck for fairly cheap. The actual whole meta itself looks relatively cheap,
Yeah,
cheaper than Pioneer.
It's definitely, aside from like a few mainstay cards, the overall meta of standard is quite cheap. You're looking at the decks here, right? You can see that most of them are about the $250, maybe under $300 mark, and you can see the most expensive are the 2 black decks that have some Shieldreds in them. But take away the Shieldreds, these 2 Shieldreds from the main, and you're dropping $151 away from the deck. I play one in the side personally, but I don't think you have to play it. Definitely, it's not a requirement to play these kind of decks. And if you take those out, it drops down to that $200, $300 range, which is not cheap, but it's acceptable. And I think that's a really nice thing to have.
Really accessible, particularly if you've got a play group with a thriving meta, thriving standard sort of meta and people playing. That means things like drafts are going to be fire. People are going to have trades.
Absolutely. And then
so we've got about 3 decks now. The 4th deck we're going to talk about.
4 decks. Yeah, we've talked about 4. We the Dimir, Golgari, Gruul / Mono Red and Mono White. And last but not least of the top 5 that we think you should play to win an RCQ, we have Azorius Tempo, or Azorius Oculus, as some like to call it.
Yeah, people. It's sort of like the reanimated deck of the format. It's sort of doing similar things what Blue Black Oculus and Modern's doing, where you use things like Picklock Prankster and Kiora the Rising Tide to put stuff in the bin. You've got things like to sort of put things into the bin, along with founding the Third Path, which is an enchantment which can help you use the graveyard, and it's using those spells to not only potentially putting Abhorrent Oculus into the bin, where you can bring it back using Helping Hand, which is or Recommission or something like that, which is almost like an Unearth to not necessarily cheat out Abhorrent Oculus, but as a way to get it in. But it also turbo fills your graveyard, with cantrips, etc., where you can then just hard cast your Abhorrent Oculus and then win through pure card advantage that way. But you also have the package of Hortigin and Kiora, where you can actually present a big beefy game-winning threat.
Absolutely, it's a deck that always catches me a little off guard, because you feel like you're doing really well. It feels like it's doing nothing, and then suddenly there is 1 or 2 Oculuses on the other side, a Hortigin on the other side, and you're facing absolute doom if you're not very careful.
It is a tempo deck, but you don't really see much in the way of counter spells. You do see sort of tempo cards such as Into the Floodmoor as interaction, etc. You can have you probably have access to some counter spells on the sideboard, but a lot of the times it seems to be get your Abhorrent Oculus out and then your sideboard cards hedge towards protection, or an alternate game plan of Monastery Mentor if you feel like your graveyard might be attacked post board.
Exactly. It's a deck that I have found to have a lot of tools to fight against a lot of different decks. You can see, 3 temporary lockdown. It's a really strong deck to play into the Dimir tempo style decks. I think it's one of the best suited at actually fighting them because it makes big beefy flyers or just annoying 1/3 flyers, while also having the right tools to fight you with things like temporary lockdown that takes away a bunch of your smaller creatures, or even sometimes has like soul partition to fight Kaito. It's one of the best ways to get rid of them, and it's that kind of style of play that I think is really leaning to the power of this deck.
I do think that this is out probably the 4 decks we spoke to so far. Sorry, this is the 5th deck we spoke to so far. I do believe that this is probably one of the more skill intensive decks in terms of, hedging your really good draws or hedging your really good potential outs to certain situations by sort of milling the top of your deck, hoping for the best, etc. And also when to actually fire off your threats. Obviously, using things like Picklock Prancer as a way to slow down your opponent. There's no real proper hard and true removal spells in this deck. It's a lot of tempo stuff. So I think out the 5 decks you spoke so far, this is probably the more challenging to play, but still very, very powerful. Still has a very high ceiling.
Absolutely. It's a very rewarding deck, and I welcome anyone to it because it is very fun to play.
So we spoke about 5 sort of decks that they're sort of the 5 options that we looked at when going into the new RCQ system, which seems to be quite an interesting system because it's a 2-deck system now. So you've got standard and modern. I've always preferred a sort of my Magic experience. I've always preferred it where I have to focus on 2 formats, and I'm quite happy that standard and modern being my 2 formats are the one, particularly in the wake of. Not in the wake of, but before coming up to the December bans, which I believe there's going to be a big shake up to modern, hopefully for the better. But yeah, they're our 5 picks. Now, Louis, shall we talk about some other decks that we had an eye on, or we think that might see fringe play, or might be really good in certain metas?
Absolutely. There is some honorable mentions that we definitely have. I think the best one to start off on is probably the Dimir Demons deck. This is the deck that won the World Championship with Javier Dominguez at the helm. Very powerful deck, very, very strong. I don't think it should be counted out at all, but it's definitely suffering a bit more in this kind of tempo-heavy meta. There's a lot that doesn't favor it against those style of decks, but it's still very powerful and can get you dead quite quick if you're not careful.
It does have that combo with Jason Perfected Mind, as well as Doomsday Excruciator. So Doomsday Excruciator says, well, it's a 6 mana, 6 black, so 6 black pips in the mana cost, and it says it's a 6/6 with flying, and when Doomsday Excruciator enters, if it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of the library face down. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may draw a card. So you draw 2 cards.
You have to do it.
Sorry?
You have to do it. You don't. It's not a may.
Yeah, you don't have to do it. But if you partner this with Jace the Perfected Mind, if you then mill yourself out, you will then win the game. So it's almost like a Thassa's Oracle win condition in a standard deck.
Exactly. And don't miss as well, you can do it with things like Restless Reef. A lot of people are like, oh, if I play my Doomsday, I'll be drawing too many cards and I'll die first. Don't forget, Restless Reef is in your deck. It mills 4 cards. It's quite good at getting your opponent dead, especially if they have something like an Unholy Annex just sitting there. They're gonna draw those extra cards, and you're gonna get them.
Yep, exactly that. So that's a really interesting deck that we think he's still using the whole as Louis said, the Archfiend of the Dross and Holy Annex combo, which seems to be really strong not only in standard but also in Pioneer. But there's a deck that I really like the look of, which is it's called Simic Tempo. So if you find out an MTG Go Fizz, it's Simic Tempo. Tempo. Yeah, you'll have to expand it. But it basically plays a lot like the blue-black or mono-blue Terror decks in Pauper. So the main threats are Tellerian Terror and this thing called Dimir Crab. And basically they both have almost like a weird sort of delve where they spell cost 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So Tellerian Terror is a common 5/5, 6 generic and a blue with ward 2. But if you have 6 instants or sorceries in your graveyard, it only costs 1 blue mana. And the same for Dimir Crab. but instead of it's still 7 mana costed, but it's 5 generic and 2 blue. But this one has flash. So what this says is obviously one costs 1 less to cast for each instance of sorcery. But when it enters and it's on not on your turn, it enters tapped. So you can't ambush Viper a blocker anyway. But when it enters, you can tap up to 2 target creatures. So you're essentially tapping down 2 big threats. Luis alluded before that Kaito is really good when it puts 2 stun counters on something. If you can tempo this out, 2 blockers, it can be amazing. You could even let them attack with stuff, take the damage for that, but then flash us in, get rid of 2 blockers, untap, and then attack with a big Tolarian Terror or a big crab, and take in a lot of damage that way. But it also has a really nice package of lots of cantrips to fix out your mana, but it also has into the Floodmaw. We said before it's a really good tempo, a really good tempo card. But it also plays things like Bushwhack, which has like fight effects because obviously your creatures are very big. But Tolarian Terror, for example, also has a pseudo self-protection outlet by the Ward 2, so you could potentially trigger the ward, let them pay for the 2, and then counter whatever they're going to do afterwards. Really deny them of resources. But because there's lots of 5+ drops in this in terms of the threats, it also plays up the beanstalk as a card advantage engine to really cycle through your deck. This married up with a card that I've never seen before other than this deck from Outlaws, which is This Town Ain't Big Enough. So this card reads, it's a 4 generic and a blue instant speed. This spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control. So it's almost like a 1 mana protection for your already flash threat. Return up to 2 target non-land permanents to the owner's hand. So you could do this in end steps to cycle Bean. You get a trigger off Bean. You then cast Bean again, draw a card. You can reset Storm Chaser's talent, and then you can obviously protect your threats with it as well.
And very importantly, something that is really, really, really cool with this card is you can target one of their threats and one of your cards. That way, it does get that 3 mana reduction still, because all it needs to do is target at least one of your things. So let's say you target an Edmure Crab, and one of their big, beefy, Shieldred, for example. Okay, so now you've returned their 4-drop, and your, at this point, might be a 2-drop. And if you have enough mana, this only costs you 2, you can then reflash in the Edmure Crab, tap down their creatures, you have your 5/5, untap, get them. There's so much tempo to the deck.
Trigger off Beans as well.
Yeah, exactly, 2 triggers off Beans. It's amazing. There's so much tempo based in this deck. It has quite a bit going on. I know Gabriel Nassif loves playing this deck, and he's been playing a lot on stream. So I'm excited to see what else can be evolved and what else can be found that will continue to make this deck grow.
This is actually a deck I bought. Actually just today, the day we were recording this, I actually bought the cards for this deck, and it cost me I think for the stuff that was missing was like £30, and that was because I bought 2 hedge mages as well because I couldn't be bothered taking them out my legacy decks.
Of course you did.
So I bought 2 more hedge mages, and it was like £30.
Yeah, because when you look at it, nothing is really expensive here, and if you don't have hedge mages, you can just play an extra island and forest. You'll be fine.
I mean, there's like 2 rares in the deck.
Looking at it, yeah.
So Storm Chaser's Talent is a rare. Analyze the Pollen is a rare. Ghost Vacuum and the Sideboard is a rare.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Unable to Scream. That's not a rare.
That's a common. Yeah, looks like it's only Ghost Vacuum. The lands, I guess. But that's basically it.
This is cheaper than a lot of Pauper decks.
It's actually really easy to play on Arena as well. So if anybody has the wild cards, it doesn't cost you a lot of rares. Nice.
Another deck we want to talk about, if you're happy to move on, Luis. Is the basically the they call it the Otter's deck. So basically, it uses Valley Flood Caller and Enduring Vitality to basically. I'm not even sure how the combo exactly works. George sat down with me and he showed me how the combo works. But you need an Otter out, you need a Valley Flood Caller out, and you need an Enduring Vitality out, and then you can generate lots of mana and lots of value, and then sort of kill them on the turn on a turn with a massive prowess Otter.
Essentially, what you're doing, guys, is with an Enduring Vitality out, all your creatures become mana dorks, right? They all become super Llanowar Elves. And with Valley Floodcaller out, they all get to untap as well. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Untap them. So Valley Floodcaller is, well, he's an otter, so it works for this because it's one of the card types. You also have Thundertrap Chainer, is also an otter. It'll work for that. And you have Storm Chasers Talents, makes an otter. And then cards like, where is it? Song of Totentans, I think it's called, Totentans, which makes a bunch of rats and gives all your creatures haste. This matters because you need to be able to give your large, amount of creatures haste. So now with Enduring Vitality, you can make a bunch of mana. Essentially, what you end up doing is making infinite mana until you churn through your deck, find another Song of Totentans, make a crap ton of rats, and hit your opponent for 1 billion. They're dead.
Yeah.
It's a very cool deck.
That seems to be a lot more hoops to jump through than, say, your typical modern Belcher deck that we just had a podcast on, so go check that out. So there seems to be more hoops to jump through because obviously the card pool and standard isn't as big as modern and even legacy. But yeah, this is a really cool, almost strict combo deck. I guess you could make a few tokens and potentially get prowess wins, etc. But generally, you want to be winning by getting the combo together.
Yeah, you do have a semi-effective beatdown.
It has been putting up numbers. It won a challenge. Was it the 27th on record? And this it won a challenge on the 27th, which is the day it was recording. You see it doing fairly well in different challenges, top 8 in quite a few 5-0s, etc. So if you are that combo player, combo mind, and wants to get into RCQ, this is a great deck for that.
Absolutely, because and remember, guys, just because it has a combo doesn't mean it needs to win with a combo. Valley Floodcaller does just give things +1/+1 until end of turn, so sometimes you can just get enough spells together on that turn, hit with it while it's very large, while it buffs up some other random creatures you may have laying around. And it plays really well. The deck is quite fun. If you love your otters as well, it's a great boon.
Speaking of, I just want to talk about one more deck, if that's all right, Luis, which is the Jeskai Convoke deck, which is sort of plays the way the old Convoke deck worked, which I hated to play against as a once infect player in standard. Or it's not infect at the moment, is it?
Toxic,
what is it called?
Yeah.
So this plays blue for the Spyglass Siren, and it also plays red for Immerdane's Recruiter, and some sideboard options. You've also got Case of the Gateway Express
and Gleeful
by Ghost. Say again, sorry.
And Gleeful Demolition, a very important
Gleeful Demolition, yeah. So let's talk about Shelter by Ghost for a second, because this is a great card. So this is an enchantment with not only it's not only like removal, but it also can protect your creature and buff it by +1, which is something something a bit of damage that might actually be relevant, and then gives it ward 2, so that's like the sort of protection element.
And lifelink.
Yeah. And lifelink too. There's a lot more text on that. I actually missed the lifelink.
Yeah.
So enchant creature you control. When Shelter by Ghost enters, exile target non-land permanent above controls until Shelter by Ghost leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. So it's removal, buffing, lifelink, protection, all in one. Like this card is sick, and this sort of utilizes that. You put that on your Immerdane's Recruiter, or even your Knight Errant of Eos, and you've got substantial life gain, particularly in the wake of all these red aggro decks that we spoke about. And then obviously you've got the gold wide package of the actual tokens themselves. Absolutely. This is a deck I was looking at putting together as well, because this is a very cheap deck, but I just couldn't be bothered with all the tokens in the end.
I actually own all of it just because randomly I do. I pulled the little uncommons from the newest sets that I was missing. I obviously own the Spyglass Sirens, and I owned the old Boros Convoke deck. And it's a really, really fun deck. It's very, very fun to play. If you love making tokens, if you love making just a bunch of stuff on your board, and you think that having more stuff means you're winning more, this is a deck for you. It's absolutely a blast, and it's very quick as well. It's very surprising how you just die out of nowhere sometimes. You Gleeful Demolition something, you play your Imidane's Recruiter, and boom, that's what I think it's.
So Gleeful Demolition's three toughness.
9 damage to your face, I think. Yeah.
Imidane's Recruiter. When Imidane's Recruiter enters the battlefield, creature control get +1/+0 and gain haste. So it's 6 damage from a Gleeful Demolition.
Yeah, 6 from the Gleeful, and then Imidane himself is another 3. So 9 total in one swing.
Does Imidane have creatures you could? Oh, so Imidane gives itself haste as well. So yeah,
it's all creatures. It's insane. It just gets you from
9
nowhere.
Damage,
and sometimes you even have things like Case of the Gateway Express already active, so you get a bit of extra damage. And I've seen many of the lists play War Leader's Call, which is ETB trigger when a creature enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to each opponent or target opponent. And then it also gives all creatures you control +1/+1. So it's a great way to just kill them over the top if they have a lot of blockers or a lot of things annoying the battlefield. There's quite a bit of reach in this style of deck.
And because you are playing the 3 colors, you do have sort of a sideboard options that you can express yourself with. So things like Destroy Evil, in the white, Torch the Tower in red, and Disdainful Stroke in blue. Stuff like that is actually really good that you kind of arc into. And the mana base looks pretty. I mean, I experienced standard with a 3-color mana base, but because of the new the way the lands are now, you can sort of splash the 3rd color relatively easily. You have to be careful with things like your Shivan Reefs and your Dark Oasis, etc., that actually ping you for damage because in the wake of the really aggro decks. But this deck aims to flood the board so with blockers and enough threats on the ground, as Louis said, where you can then have a really substantial backswing.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the conclusion of our list of decks here. We have our top 5 plus our honorables mention. I hope that you guys enjoyed the list we brought to you today. I know it's quite a lot to dig into. Standard is a very, very, very wide format. There's many other decks we didn't talk about that are still around and might be interesting. So let us know what you like and what you think you're going to be playing this standard season. And if there's anything that you think really should have been in the top 5, let us know. It's always a fun little conversation to have about what's going on in standard, what we think is the best, and what we expect to shake up the format.
Do you want to talk about our weekend that we just had?
Sure.
Well, because this is a featured episode, right? So this is not a standalone, standard only podcast. This is our featured slot for the week, should we say? We had a really good weekend, didn't we, Luis?
Absolutely. We got to cast the Axion Now Invitational by the 10th year anniversary one, where they had a Pro Tour qualifying slot for the winner of the tournament. Thanks to our good friend Will Hall, who allowed us to be casters on his stream. The Will Hall experience. It was a insanely fun experience. You joined me on the Saturday, and then I had Lucy join us on the Sunday as well. It was a super fun time. Yeah, shout out to Lucy. So interesting, so intricate. It was modern gameplay, so it's my favorite. I love casting that kind of thing. I even tried our hand at Limited, which was not easy by any means.
It wasn't easy. I think because the way it was, we couldn't really read the cards and stuff. We messed up a little bit on there. But when we actually knew the cards and knew what they were doing, I know this artwork. I know exactly what this card does. We were all over it, and I feel like I was a bit apprehensive at first, because even though we do this podcast and we do talk a lot of dirt at each other, I was quite worried the fact that I wasn't used to sort of on the spot talking in terms of like a commentary level, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I was pretty apprehensive going into it, but once you actually realize, like, people know more than they think, right? And then once you start seeing these cards being played, and then you're imagining it in your head, is actually a really cool experience. And I was glad to share it with you, Luis.
Oh, it was very fun. You should have seen Josh at the very start. He looked like a deer in headlights, like, oh, hi guys, how's it going? Well, welcome to the stream. Having a great time. But as it went on, he got really into the
live before we realized, and we were like, oh, wait, we're live.
Yeah, if you watch the very start, you can see us panic a little bit as we get onto it. But it was super fun. Our voices sound a little shot right now from both getting sick, a little bit of a cold, plus just speaking so much during the stream. But it was a great time.
just on the subject of standard, because it just popped into my head just now. Domain was a big problem. Not a problem, but a big show in the previous standard format. And when I say previous, I mean before the rotation. Now it's still there, but because triomes are now gone, it's sort of hedging towards your surveil lands, etc., to get the mana fixing, and it doesn't seem to be doing as well.
Yeah, it's changed quite a lot. It almost kind of plays like Zur the newest versions, right? Plays Zur the Eternal Schemer or something like that. Yeah, Zur Eternal Schemer from Dimir United, which is what the Pioneer version of this deck was doing. They didn't call themselves Domain because they were just playing enchantments, right? They were called Zur enchantments or something like that. And in this version, they play a little more towards Domain, using things like Herd Migration. You have your Sunfalls, all that kind of good stuff, like Lane Binding. But it uses the Overlords, very strong, powerful cards, especially when Zur can make them into creatures a bit quicker and faster, giving them, the Hexproof, Lifelink, and Death Touch. So it makes them very hard to block or fight against and race. But the deck is a bit clunky. You don't have the triomes like you do in Pioneer, and it just can fall a little flat sometimes. It can be very slow to get going. The tap lands are not fantastic. Yeah, they're Surveil, they do some cool things, but getting to that domain is not always simple or quick or fast or easy. And if you stumble, especially with the amount of aggro and how good the aggro is right now, it can have a bit of a problem. And when you play things like Dimir Tempo against it, you're loving life. Dimir Tempo dances circles around this style of deck most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's still fun, still decent, but I would be careful. Not
I
right
wouldn't
now.
play it. Yeah. I'd be very careful. I'm pretty confident with the 5 decks that we picked. You could find a pretty powerful RCQ winning deck from there. Obviously, when you get to the RC levels, you need to really be thinking of sort of innovating a little bit around standard and expecting having a meta expectation there. But the innovation can come within those archetypes, as we said before.
Absolutely. And this is our wrap up for standard. This is a very fun thing that I hope you guys enjoyed. Let us know, please, if you enjoy this kind of content, as we'd love to make some more for you guys. And anything else you want to talk about, Josh? Anything else that comes to mind?
No, I'm pretty happy with this. I just want to say, as I look forward to, we've got some pretty interesting guests lined up with some pretty interesting subjects. So yeah, we'll just watch this space, because I'm really excited for the future about Chads.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking a lot more about Modern and Standard coming up. We have the Modern the Modern RC in Prague in January. And then this is Standard season now, so there's just a lot more content with that to come. And then we're like Josh said, looking to have some really fun and interesting people come onto the cast who some of you may or may not recognize, depending how long you've been in Magic. And I hope that you guys enjoy what they have to say.
Sweet. I'm happy there if you are, Luis. I'm happy to wrap it up.
Not a worries. Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope you had a blast listening to this one, and that you enjoyed all the standard content. Let us know, like I said, what your deck of choice is, what you think you're going to be playing, or what deck we missed out on for the top 5 list that you think should absolutely be there. And join us on the next podcast of Battle Chats. It's always a pleasure. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share with your grandmother, your mother, your family members, everyone you can. And catch you guys on the next one. Take care.
See you guys. Bye.